Welcome. I'm Elizabeth Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of the American Society of International Law, and it's really wonderful to have you all here at Tiller House this morning. I kind of hate to interrupt all that good networking that was already going on. But we have a terrific panel here this morning, and we'd all like to hear from them, and then we'll do more of that networking afterwards. I had the benefit of standing at the door or at the stairs here and meeting all of you. So I can tell you, you're an incredible group of people and incredibly diverse in your professional experience. You come from a lot of law firms and from the State Department and other federal agencies and Amnesty International and the ICRC and IBM. And so do make a point of introducing yourselves around, because we have in this room the rich diversity that really makes the society such a wonderful forum. Those of you who are not members of the Society, I want to encourage you to think about joining. There are materials out in the hallway and downstairs. The Society regularly convenes its members here at Tiller House and around the country and around the world to talk about international law. Our mission is to promote greater understanding of international law. We do that through our publications and through our programs, substantive programs, and also these kinds of networking and social events. So it's a wonderful community. I'm sure you'll get a sense of that today, and hope that we can count you among our members in the future. One of the great things about the Society is our interest groups. And I think WILIG is one of the best. WILIG may have been the first interest group. It's one of our oldest, founded in the 1980s, and has really been an important support for women in our field, and it continues to be so today. We have great leadership in Christine Husky and Clara Brillenberg, and they're going to introduce our panel and moderate the discussion today. But they really create within the Society this special community for women, and we are really excited because this fall we are going to be launching a new program, a mentoring program for women in international law. The Society has received a small grant to work with WILIG to do more programs like this and to actually formally pair members with one another to support each other in developing their careers in the field. So it's still kind of on the drawing board, and we welcome your ideas about how to organize the mentoring program. And Christine and Clara may want to elaborate a little bit more on their thoughts about where that's going. But without further introduction, I will turn it over, I guess, to Christine, and again, welcome you to Tiller House.
Thank you, Betsy and Sheila and Veronica, for making this breakfast happen. You all are always so supportive of our work and always make things go smoothly. So Clara and I would like to welcome you all to this breakfast, which has become really one of my favorite events of the year, other than the annual meeting, of course, Betsy. But it's really nice to see some returning faces and lots of new faces. And as Betsy mentioned, we're really excited about this fall and rolling out our formal mentoring program. We'll probably have two tiers, one for sort of young professionals and the other for mid-career women looking perhaps to move laterally. So please, we really do welcome your suggestions and ideas for that, and look for more details on that. So I think without further ado, I'll turn it over to Clara, and we'll get started with our wonderful panelists. Thank you.
Well, we're really excited about the four panelists we have here today. We hope that they represent a diversity of experiences. We know that we have a diversity of experience in the audience, and people who are looking for diverse experiences in the audience. So you are sure to get it with these women. I would regale you with their impressive lists of experiences and positions that have led them to where they are today. But hopefully that's what they'll be doing. So I will just quickly let you know who each of them are, and without taking up more time than is due, let the talking go to the speakers themselves. So we have next to me Linda Minghetti, who is the Vice President of the Emergency Committee for American Trade, where she focuses on investment and trade policy. Next to her, we have Justice Eusebia Nicolaus Munuo, and I apologize if I mispronounce. I myself am a victim of mispronunciation frequently. And to her right is Alexandra Maisbay, also admittedly a colleague of mine at Floyd Hoag. And finally, we have Christina Finch, who is Policy Director for Women's Rights at Amnesty International and an adjunct professor at George Mason University. I would like to start and give the honors to Justice Munuo, who has not only traveled far to be with us today, and it's quite an honor and opportunity to have her speaking with us, but has accomplished so much in her time. As it says in her bio, and I encourage you to read the sheets in front of you, she is a justice or judge on the Court of Appeals of Tanzania, which is the equivalent of the Tanzanian Supreme Court. So without further ado, I hand the microphone over to Justice Munuo. Thank you all so much for coming today.
Good morning. Sisters, I don't have any brothers here today. I only have many sisters. Good morning to you all. I understand that. Then I can see. Yeah, I understand that we're interested in two aspects. I don't need to introduce myself because you will read the bio. But I'll first tell you about my career path. Well, I started at the University of East Africa at that time, and I graduated with LLB Honors in March 1970. It used to be called the University of East Africa at that time because it was run by 3 countries, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. And we then had the East African Community. Somehow the political leaders quarreled, so 1970, that was the end of the East African University. And we broke up, so now we have the Dar es Salaam University instead of the East African University. So we're the last group in the East African University. So I graduated at the age of 23 years because I started class in school when I was 5 years old. I didn't stop anywhere along the line. So when I reached the university, I was 23 years. And my interest was to administer law. Now, under the Constitution, it is the judiciary which administers law. So I thought I should join the judiciary. But then I realized that there the Criminal Procedure Code, Cap 20 of our laws at that time, there was a provision which said women are not allowed to be assessors. Assessors is equivalent to jury. So when I told my colleagues who were 90 in the class, and in our class of 90 there were only 2 women. And I was one from Tanzania, and my colleague Valeria was a Kenyan. She's now retired. So when I said, just in the course of discussion with my colleagues, that I would like to join the judiciary, they brought that provision to my audience. Do you know that women are not allowed to be assessors in our courts? I said, yes, I know. Now, do you think you can be a magistrate in a court which does not allow women to be assessors? I said, I will be a magistrate. So when I graduated, I went to the registrar of the High Court, and I said, I'm applying for a job because I want to be a magistrate. And was then, I think, the registrar was about maybe 15 years. He looked at me, and he thought I was overconfident. And he said, do you know that we don't have women on the bench? I said, yes, I know. And do you know that women are not allowed to be assessors? I said, yes, I know. And you still want to work in the judiciary? I said, yes. He said, okay, come here, young lady. So I followed him. He took me to the office of the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice at that time was one Telford Georges, who was an expatriate from Trinidad. And I guess he was maybe 59 years to 60. But he was a very fatherly fellow. And because I was very confident, I just went straight and said, what do you want? I said, I want to get the judiciary. The judiciary said this. Are you sure you want this job in which there are no women? I said, that's exactly what I want. I will start. So he said, okay. So you give us your application. And I just applied right there and gave the application to him. He told me, you go come tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. So I went home, very confident that I was going to get the job. And the morning I came, I went to see him. He said, he gave me a letter which he told me to take to the Attorney General. Apparently, I wanted the Attorney General to clear that, whether the government was prepared to employ women in the judiciary. So I took the letter to the Attorney General. I didn't know the Attorney General, but I took the letter there because I know where the office was. I looked at the office and asked the Attorney General in. I said yes. He said yes. I want to see him. You have an appointment? I said no, but I have a letter from the Attorney General. So they allowed me in. I went to see the Attorney General. He read the letter and laughed. He said, are you sure you want to be in the judiciary? I said yes. So he directed me to the Director of Administration, which I went. And the Director of Administration gave me another letter to take back to the Chief Justice. And I took that letter to the Chief Justice. So the Chief Justice opened the letter and said, oh, you're very lucky. We can employ you. So I was given the date then to be sworn in. At that time, I thought all these matters are just ordinary things. I didn't think there was much to it really, because my interest was to work, to apply for the job, and I knew I had the qualifications. And I knew I wanted to administer justice. I've been reading about cases, reported cases and so forth. So I wanted to be one of those who decides these cases. So when, on the day when I was being sworn in as a resident magistrate, grade 3 at that time, we used to start from grade 3, I didn't know that it was going to have such a big impact. There was a large group of women from all corners gathered there to come and witness that event. It was then that I realized that I had taken over, I had taken responsibility perhaps which was heavier than I thought, because I didn't see why the fuss. I didn't see why. But they told me, you keep on this job, don't walk out, keep on the job. Well, maybe they thought I was a bit scared and leave. At that time there were 45 male resident magistrates, and I was the 46th, the only one. And there were male judges in the High Court. And of course, in the Court of Appeal, there were no women. Anyway, the good thing is, after I was sworn in, this provision in the Criminal Procedure Code was repealed. So since then until now, women can be court assessors. And there are many women court assessors. Now, so I started my job, and I was lucky because I got my orientation from the Chief Justice himself. I suppose he wanted to make sure he puts me on the right track. Just in case I fall, as you know, they'll say, well, is this young woman going to make it? But, and I was very attentive. And he emphasized the question of personal integrity, professional integrity, and of course, knowing your law, preparing for your cases well, being courteous, and so forth. So after 3 months, I went to my court. I started my cases. I didn't meet any particular challenges. So in no time I was promoted to RM grade 2, RM grade 1, principal resident magistrate with extended jurisdiction, without realizing that. But I must say I enjoyed my work because essentially it just meant hearing evidence and determining cases, because that is throughout the magistracy until I became principal resident magistrate, when I had extended jurisdiction, meaning I was doing High Court work in addition to my original jurisdiction cases. And I had original jurisdiction in all criminal matters, in all offences triable in the subordinate court. And subordinate court means the district court and the court of resident magistrate in which I was sitting. And then when I got extended jurisdiction, I got additional jurisdiction to try High Court civil cases, hear election petitions, hear criminal sessions cases. So I was a magistrate, a resident magistrate for 18 years. And then I was appointed the judge of the High Court. I was appointed judge of the High Court in April 1987. And I said with the High Court, because I already had experience with High Court work, I had no problem trying murder cases, which is what most people feared, because they thought women can't try murder cases and sentence people to death, because we have the death sentence as the only penalty. But I always say Well, that's what the law says. I read the law. I'm not, and the parliament was to change that law, so it didn't give me any problem usually. So I stayed in the High Court for 12 years. And then I was elevated to the Court of Appeal, which is the last court, the Supreme Court, which is where I am until now. So I was happy that throughout, although I started off alone, now we have 5 women justices in the Court of Appeal. We have 25 judges in the High Court of Tanzania. We have 160 resident magistrates where I started. And we have about 400 magistrates in the grassroots courts, we call them primary courts. So, actually in the subordinate court, the number of male magistrates and women magistrates almost balances. You know, at some point I think the women will overtake them because women love the judiciary, they like being in the judiciary. and each time when they advertise posts, they all come and tell me, how do I make sure that I join the judiciary? One thing, well, people work in the judiciary, that's a self-supervising job. It's actually a job I would say it's very good for women. Because you don't have people telling you what to do, what to do. You are really self-supervising your own job. And provided you are committed to your job and you know your law, you can do the job well. 2, it's also a job which is, I think, very rewarding when you have been able to solve social crises for other people. Well, I had jurisdiction in criminal matters and civil matters, so I did matrimonial cases, I did custody cases also, I did probate and administration of estates, succession cases. So you really come to deal with people's personal problems, which sometimes are very, very intricate and complex. And when you solve them and solve them well, you feel a sense of self-realization. That yes, this is what I said I'll be doing and I'm doing it right. So, but in addition to all those, I'm also an activist, a human rights activist, in the sense that in 2000 we started our Association of Women Judges, and I'm a founder member, and I was president for chairperson of the association for 10 years until last January. And we started off first as individual members of the International Association of Women Judges. Have you heard about it? The International Association of Women Judges is actually an international association of women judges all over the world, including my country, Tanzania. It started here in Washington in 1991, and I joined the association in 1996. And because we were only 3 judges then, we could not form a national chapter yet. But by the year 2000, we had more than 15 judges. We had about 4 judges and senior magistrates. So we could form a national chapter of the International Association of Women Judges. Now, the International Association of Women Judges and the Tanzania Women Judges have been running a jurisprudence of equality program. The jurisprudence of equality simply means a program of training judges and giving them the necessary knowledge and skill so that they can apply international law norms to domestic problems which come before the courts. And I was very surprised when I heard that in the US, you don't apply international law in the domestic courts. When you are members of the UN and so forth. So that program has been on until now. We went to JOG, jurisprudence of the ground, which we partnered with IAWJ and the Society of Women Against AIDS in Africa and ourselves. The society has community-based organizations, so through them we are able to reach the grassroots and solve their problems on inheritance, property rights, equal property, equality problems, discrimination problems, violence against women, apply CEDAW, apply the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, apply the African Charter of Human Rights, sometimes bringing the American human rights, go to Europe, import the European Human Rights Convention, and we use all these laws because we believe that they reinforce our decisions the same way as we use persuasive authorities from the US, from Canada, from South Africa, from other jurisdictions in the world. So I do apply human rights law and the principles in my cases. Just to give you one case before I sit, which I think maybe might be of interest to you. Is a young man who wanted to marry a girl, but he did not have, what he didn't have money, and he wanted this particular girl. So he looked for other men, other strong men, to ambush the girl when she was going to church. So as she was going to church, they caught her and took her to this young man's house. His colleagues helped him rape the girl. You know, they put the legs apart, hold, and then he had a sexual intercourse with her. Of course, she was seriously injured and so forth, but because it was a big war, the other girls who were going to church with this particular girl went home to tell her father. Her father came with another band of strong men. They broke into this young man's house. He rescued the daughter, but of course, she had already been raped. But then, this young man was charged with rape. And his defense was, this is traditional, that when you love a woman and she doesn't love you, you can ambush and capture her. Then you marry by, marriage by capture. And marriage by capture means, because you have already embarrassed her, she'll feel shy, she won't like to go back home again. People know she has been raped, so she'll keep to your house. So the important question was, is this marriage by capture recognized by customary law? And my ruling in that case was no, because customary law respects marriage. And what is marriage? It's a union between two people. It must be voluntary, between one man and one woman. So when you have captured someone, the aspect of volition does not exist on the part of the woman. So you can't call it marriage anymore. Then we said, no, the law of marriage recognizes marriage as voluntary union. Now, when you go to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it recognizes the right to privacy, the right to form a family. But doesn't say use violence. Then you go to CEDAW, all traditions and customs which victimize or suppress women should be prohibited, but the state should make a deliberate effort to eliminate those. So even under CEDAW, the practice cannot be that in light of the fact that our country also ratified CEDAW. Now, that practice cannot be allowed in our country. And so you'll see, and then I went to the charter, to the African Charter of Human Rights. Does it allow this type of thing? No, it recognizes voluntary marriages, not marriages by capture. So I ended up convicting this fellow and sentencing him to the statutory minimum sentence, which is 30 years imprisonment. He appealed to the High Court, to the Court of Appeal. No, the case started in the District Court. He was convicted. Then he came to the High Court, then I took it to the High Court, and then upheld the conviction on those grounds. Now he appealed further to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal upheld the decision of the High Court. So now, that case sent a lot of sensation and vibrations, and had these judgments printed over the bar counter. So when men go to the bar, they'll say, oh, that case is here. You want to buy a copy? 500 shillings. So they knew, because they knew, now new jurisprudence has come in. So I'm saying that it's a pity that people don't allow domestic courts to use international law, but I say international law should be used to reinforce decisions of the domestic courts. And because we are all human beings anyway, and when we say we are all equal, there can't be, what's the use of writing 5 conventions and then keeping them in the books if you don't apply them? So with that note, I will say, I encourage each one of you to be a good lawyer. If you are already one, to be an excelling lawyer in your career. If you are thinking of joining the foreign service or whatever I do, you are a lawyer, and a lawyer is a very, very competent person. Use your skills to also redeem the women who are not yet redeemed and who are really looking upon, looking on us to do something extra apart from your work to make sure that they get their legal rights. Thank you very much.
And many of these discussions will lead to questions, so please start writing them down now. We'll have a question and answer period at the end. With that, I'll pass the microphone on to Linda McNulty.
Can you hear me okay back there? Yeah. My kids always tell me to quiet down when we go out in public because I don't have any problem in speaking loudly. So, good morning, everybody. I really appreciate the invitation to come and be here with such a distinguished panel. Justice, I'm so moved and impressed by the work that you've done. It is something I think we all could aspire to one day, to make that type of influence in our own country and frankly around the world. Mine is a very different tale of a career in international law. I'll start at the very beginning, well, not the very beginning. From about 8th grade on, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I started debating and I loved it. I loved the rigor, I loved the argumentation, I loved the ideas back and forth, the organization of your mind that you bring when you're a lawyer. Started the debate group in my high school, went on to college, and raced through college in 3 years because I couldn't wait to be a lawyer. And I went out to Bolt Hall in Berkeley, California, and really detested my first year of law school. I don't know if anyone else had that experience. The thing that I found most redeeming, I mean, you're in these large classes and you learn things. Not quite the Socratic method that my political philosophy courses in undergraduate suggested, because the teacher always knew what the answer was going to be, and it wasn't sort of coming out from the body. The thing I was impressed with at Berkeley were the students who had done other things. I had raced through undergraduate because I wanted to so much be a lawyer. So I ended up taking off 3 years between my first and second year at law school, and went into the Peace Corps, went to West Africa, Togo, unfortunately highly repressive country, but was trying to make a difference, and hopefully I made something of a difference. But certainly it was one of the experiences in my life that fundamentally changed my outlook, my perceptions of what's important. And as my uncle said to me when I got back, actually he said this a few years ago, he said, "You were so shy and quiet before you left, and when you came back, you wouldn't be quiet. You stood up and you talked." And you know, I tell my kids now I'm shy. I used to be shy, and they don't believe it. You learn to stand up for yourself as a woman in differing parts of the world in ways I had not learned growing up in the United States. I continued at law school. Wonderful thing about Berkeley. Oh, great, Peace Corps. Yeah, come back. That's great. And the thing I had never really focused on prior to that, but certainly after the Peace Corps experience, was the international side of law. And I had the great fortune to have professors like David Caron and others at Berkeley who gave me a perspective on the panoply of public international law, international trade law. We had a professor at the time who spoke every language of the European Union at that time, but that was like 12 languages, and really gave that introduction. I ended up coming to Washington, D.C. with a law firm, where the head of the law firm, the D.C. office, it was then McKenna Cuneo, was the former Peace Corps director in neighboring Benin. So someone who valued the type of experience, because for those of you who are second year or beyond, you know you come back to that second year and you're interviewing for a job if you're going to go in the law firm world. And I was about 6 weeks back in the country. And I had to, you know, explain sort of, do you really want to do this? I was like, well, yeah, I came back. So I ended up at McKenna and Cuneo, and then later at, very sad to say, Dewey Ballantyne, which, as you all know, is undergoing a bankruptcy at the moment. But I spent my time doing international trade law cases, so the anti-dumping, countervailing duty, customs work. I also did a lot of government procurement, mostly the domestic side, a lot of the defense side. As I went to Dewey, I grew. I ended there as a fifth-year associate, but I was co-managing the appellate litigation for all the steel cases, the anti-dumping cases in the mid-1990s. One of the other things I did there was I did a bunch of pro bono work with one of the partners, not in the international section, but who was doing work on developing draft judiciary laws of Moldova or the Slovak Republic. He was really fascinated by my background, and it was he and not any of the international trade partners who recommended me for a Council on Foreign Relations Young Fellowship. I was awarded that, and it was one of these things where if you're in the private sector, you have to go to the public sector and vice versa. So I ended up using that to go work on Capitol Hill, and I went to go work for Senator Bill Bradley, where I handled everything international. Immigration was really big that year, which was great because I'd done a lot of immigration at law school, including clinicals, and so that was useful. But I did defense, I did veterans because they went abroad, I did an international policy, and if anybody knows the former senator, they know that he just loved everything international, and we had soon-to-be leaders or former leaders or leaders of various countries around the world. And here I was more in the commercial trade side, and I did that, but that was less hot that year. You know, you suddenly had to learn about the rest of the world and really, you know, honed your skills of getting to know who in the community, both on Capitol Hill, at the think tanks, at the State Department, in the government. Who can you talk to? Okay, we've got the person who eventually took over Hong Kong before it was returned to China. Give me some background on this. How are we going to, hold this meeting? What does my boss need to know? What are the types of things that we should be talking about? And so it was a wide variety of great experience. For those that are thinking about careers in public policy, Capitol Hill has a lot of cons. I mean, you see that in the newspapers and the ads and the partisan politics. But there is so much working for the right members that you can learn and grow in. I finished my fellowship that year, and then lo and behold, just the serendipity of the moment, a position opened on the Senate Finance Committee. That's the committee in the U.S. Senate, like our friends on Ways and Means in the House, that has jurisdiction over everything on international trade. And so I became the #2 International Trade Counsel for the Democratic side, the minority side of the committee, working for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. So I had the great privilege in my career to work for two members who were very focused internationally, knew more than I will ever know on many of these topics, and cared passionately about expanding U.S. engagement globally on good terms, on terms that raised all of our boats. On the Senate Finance Committee, I worked, and it's something you do more on committee staff than you do in an individual member office. I worked on drafting legislation, and so when I was there, and having been in West Africa, it was perfect. We wrote and actually got passed the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, known as AGOA, that continues today. There's lots of reasons why it hasn't produced more of what it should have, but it was a wonderful experience to be there, to take the personal experiences that I had in the world and be able to help translate and influence legislation in ways that were meaningful going forward, and to see how public policy and how the laws that we deal with on the international commercial side in the United States are made. And it is sausage making, but it is something that I feel passionately about, that we need bright, committed international lawyers to think about as a career. Because if we don't have folks up on Capitol Hill who understand international law, understand the broader global issues that we and everyone around the world is dealing with, we're not necessarily going to get the best result. After my second pro-trade Democrat member announced his retirement, one child later, Capitol Hill life is not always the easiest when you have young children, because sometimes they're on the floor till midnight or 2 o'clock, or our Africa legislation, when we concluded it, we were there all night, and we were there many weekends. I decided to move into the private sector, and a position was opened up where I am now, which is the Emergency Committee for American Trade. It's a mouthful. We call it ECAT. And we are a business association membership organization that represents U.S. headquartered companies across every sector of the U.S. economy. Not every company, but many of the big U.S. companies. IBM is one of our wonderful members, but we have folks in agriculture, in services. Our chairman is the McGraw-Hill companies, so publishing and financial services, as well as manufacturing, Caterpillar, something like that. And what we do is we advocate for policies, be they U.S. laws or regulations, U.S. approaches to international negotiations, or the outcome of international negotiations that expand trade and investment, because we believe very passionately that with 95% of the world's population outside our borders, 87% of world growth in the next 5 years is outside the United States. This is a way that we can grow opportunities both here and overseas. We hear a lot of people demagoguing trade. I was speaking to a student before this began from China, and that's one of the issues that we deal with a lot, and you see it in the news. Oh my gosh, you know, China is costing American jobs. Well, actually, I think there are certainly some job losses that go to China, but there's actually a lot of interesting data out there that suggests something quite different. And that one of the things that we know as we look at China is China's ability, India's ability to raise hundreds of millions of people out of poverty is about commercial opportunity, is about international trade. And this doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. There are ways to make this win-win. One of the areas that I spend a lot of time, I was just in Vietnam for a session we organized for the Asia Pacific business groups on foreign investment. U.S. companies, other companies from around the world, they invest overseas. Why do they do that? So they can get cheaper labor? Yeah, maybe sometimes, but frankly, most of the times that's not true at all. They want to expand opportunities, they want to sell into those markets, and there's lots of benefits they bring back home, and there are enormous benefits that they bring to those foreign countries, particularly many of the developing countries. I love what I do. I am at this intersection of international law, being a lawyer in what I do. There are a few lawyers in this business trade association world, but I'm one of the few ones who's actually practiced law and who's, you know, has gone into the depth and working on the finance committee. You learn about every U.S. trade law there is. But it's both the law, it's influencing government policy on a substantive basis, and it's the economics, and it's the broader worldview. So why don't I stop there?
Without further ado, Alexander Maisbay.
I think that makes it my turn. These are two very hard acts to follow. I want to thank Willig and Aisel for the invitation to come today. I've been asked to speak about sort of how I got here and perhaps how I got from A to B. And I have to say it's been a really winding path, more like A to Q to M to Z to B. But I will try and explain how that happened, because in some very strange way it makes a lot of sense. And I think as you talk to people in their careers in international law, whatever we decide that means, you'll find that they'll tell you something very similar. Rare is the person who starts off saying, I want to do X, and goes directly to X. There are so many opportunities out there. Being here in DC, I feel like every week, if not every day, I hear about a new organization or program or project that I not only didn't know existed, but they're probably addressing a problem I didn't know existed. And so I'm constantly learning, and I just say this because keep your ears open, because you never know when an opportunity might arise, and rarely is it when you expect. I did not know I wanted to be a lawyer when I was 8, I would say.
8th grade.
Sorry, 8th grade. Absolutely, I wanted to be in the Foreign Service. That's what I wanted to do. I did a State Department exchange program when I was 13. I somehow convinced my parents to send me to what was then just barely not the Soviet Union. I was set. I wanted to do Foreign Service, Foreign Service. I even started off my undergraduate career at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. And for a number of reasons, I decided actually to transfer to Dartmouth College, but my interest in foreign service work, international relations work, didn't wane, although I became a religion major. But that led me, I actually studied the disintegration of Yugoslavia and war crimes work and things like that in Yugoslavia. And one thing leading to another, unusual as it may be, I ended up doing a Fulbright in photography in Albania. This makes sense, I swear. Because my photographic project was documenting the resurgence of religious life in Albania post-communism. So approaching a topic I had done undergrad, but from a totally different perspective. This is where the law comes in. Because being in Albania in a time of amazing transition, I met a lot of very interesting people who were doing work on that transition, and it seemed like many of them were lawyers. And the more I talked, the more I said, what you're doing is very interesting. How did you get there? And this is a question I have asked throughout my career when I meet somebody who is doing something interesting, or I think, oh, well, how is it that they got to do that, or how did they think to do that? I always seem to learn from the answer. So that's another point of advice I put out there for you. But as I succinctly tell people, if there were ever going to be a situation that teaches you about the power of the rule of law, it's being in a place without rule of law. And so I started considering, this is where I started thinking about law school. After Albania, I worked for an international political development organization known as the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs. I worked in their Central and Eastern European department, where I dealt with countries that had significant Muslim populations. And this comes from my previous focus in Islamic studies. So I was dealing with Albania, Bosnia, Macedonia, things like this. Over time, though, as an undergrad, I had interned, I should mention, with the United States State Department at several posts overseas. And that was a fantastic experience. And to this day, well over a decade later, if I look at it, I still draw upon people I met there, skills I learned in those internships, and just experiences I had there. So I highly recommend those for anyone who is still a student and able to take advantage of those. And it was while I was working for NDI that I applied to law school. And I went to Georgetown Law School. I started off still working at NDI during the day, going to law school at night. I eventually, though, transferred into the full-time program so that I could also do a concurrent degree, because I looked at people who had jobs, for instance, for international organizations or for international criminal tribunals, and I realized they had both master's degrees. Many of them had master's degrees and law degrees. So I decided I want that. So I pursued a master's in public administration, but at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs, because the international component was very important to me, but I also wanted the practical side. I wanted to have the skills to be able to read the spreadsheets and do the kinds of quantitative analysis. As someone that I spoke with before I went to law school commented, and she was she went to Harvard Law School, and in her graduating class, I believe she said she was one of 4. And she said one of the reasons why she went to law school was because it was a union card that no one could ever take away from her. Because despite the difficulties of being one of few women in a profession or in a class, having a law degree means something that perhaps has more meaning than just you as the individual. If you have the skills and the qualifications, people cannot take that away from you. And when deciding whether to do a master's, that was the bit that pushed me over the line, because I wanted to be able to say, have the certain skills, have the background, and sort of bring out that union card if need be. But during my law school time in law school, I continued my connections with NDI. I actually spent a summer doing domestic election observation efforts in Yemen. I'm still in contact with people at NDI today, even though I have been in and out of the public and private sectors. I, as a law student, summered at White & Case, law firm here. Actually, I summered at their New York office. And I went in wanting to do project financing because this came from the idea of economic development is a base for stability and rule of law and regional development and this, that, and the other thing. And it was while there that I got introduced to international arbitration, which I have to say I did not know existed when I started law school. I will readily admit that. I think it has become more commonly known in recent years, but when I heard that you could do public international law in a private setting, I was sign me up. That's what I wanted to do. And I also recall that one of my professors in law school, David Sheffer, who was the former ambassador at large for war crimes, he had, when I asked him, how did you get to where you were? He had emphasized the importance of his time in the private sector at a law firm and the skills that he had learned there and how he found it so helpful when he transitioned into the public sector. And so this set me off on a career in the private sector. And after law school, I continued working for White & Case. I worked, though, in their DC office, doing international arbitration and litigation. I was involved in sovereign litigation matters in U.S. courts. The few times that international law does sneak in into a U.S. court. Also international arbitration matters, mostly investor-state arbitration, which is treaty-based, and also some commercial arbitration. And while there, though, I, my interest in other international matters, especially human rights matters, that didn't go away. And I am very grateful that not only does international arbitration often deal with international human rights treaties, international treaties, but in my pro bono work, I got to exercise my interest in those as well. And so I did work on asylum cases, usually representing women from the Middle East. I also was able to do some government advising work in a pro bono capacity, especially in Haiti after the earthquake, dealing with some emergency legal measures. And while at the firm, though, I realized that I wanted to develop my writing skills, and something I had not considered right out of law school, but started to consider at this point was doing a federal clerkship. And everyone I had met who had done a federal clerkship just could not say enough about how much they learned during it and how useful the writing skills, especially the advocacy skills that they learned were. And so I clerked on the First Circuit Court of Appeals. But again, my interest in public service hadn't changed during this time, and knowing when I was going to start clerking, I took the opportunity to leave White & Case earlier than perhaps I would have if I did them back-to-back, and I volunteered at the War Crimes Tribunal in Cambodia, the United Nations Assistance to the Khmer Rouge Tribunals, UNICRT. And I will say, importance of networking. How this came about is that I was at an event here in DC that was sponsored by the Avon Center for Global Justice, which was being run by an alum of my law firm, who was then at Cornell Law School. And while at that series of events was a full day program, I was sat at a table with a Supreme Court justice from Zambia, who also served, now and again, on the Cambodian War Crimes Tribunal. And we got to chatting. And this is Justice Florence Mumba. It's a wonderful woman. And by talking to her is how I learned of the possible opportunities for volunteer positions in Cambodia. And so one thing led to another, and that's how I got there. So the person you're sitting next to now, I hope you've enjoyed your chat. And I worked at the Cambodian tribunals. I then clerked. And while clerking, even though I focused almost exclusively on domestic issues, I also taught at Vermont Law School international arbitration. And throughout my time in private practice, I have volunteered to lecture at different law schools. I've lectured at undergrads. I also do a lot of career advising and law school application advising and things like this. So I will admit I have my hand in a lot of pots. My husband perhaps thinks that he wishes I did less. But I do it because I love it, and because being involved in these different activities, for me, helps me feel like a more rounded person, but it also energizes me in the other aspects of my work. Because having, for instance, being at an event like this and getting to meet so many people who are so excited about what they do re-energizes me for what I do. It's very easy being in an office all day to forget that, and it's great to get out and get fresh perspective. I now work for Foley Hoag here in DC. It's a Boston-based law firm. I work in their international litigation and arbitration department. Again, I'm doing international arbitration. We do commercial arbitration, investor-state arbitration, but this particular practice also has a very heavy public international law component, which is what attracted me to the practice. They're involved in cases before the ICJ. They do maritime border disputes, this kind of thing. And even though I've only been there a short time, I've also been involved in pro bono work. We were advising some South American NGOs on human trafficking issues. And I have to say, all those projects, people that I worked with were not all from my department. They were from litigation departments and this kind of thing. So just the international work, even if you end up doing a job that you think might not be international on paper, you certainly have opportunities to do international work otherwise. And I will give you one other example that comes from the Cambodian tribunals. One of the permanent staff members of the court was a U.S. trained lawyer, and she said that, but of course I'm asking her, how did you, end up on this tribunal? Because the backgrounds of people on these tribunals are just astounding. And what was unusual about her is that she had not done international criminal law formally before. She was a corporate attorney at a large international law firm, but she knew that she wanted to get into this type of work. And so she sought out pro bono projects that involved international criminal law matters, and she tried to get her hands on everything she could in her pro bono practice to get the skills that she needed to get the qualifications to apply for that job. And so I mention this because she is proof that you can do it. It's something to think about. If there's a job that you want that's out there, even if you think on paper, I don't meet this description, think about what skills you have or what skills you need to then be able to apply for that position. Don't be intimidated by just a word or a title, because it is just a title and it's more about skills. So I don't want to rattle on, and perhaps I will leave it there and we'll speak more during the question period. But thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be on such a distinguished and exciting panel. Thank you so much for inviting me, Willig and Aisel. So I don't want to talk too long, so I want to make sure we've got time for questions, but maybe just a couple of notes about my career path and how I ended up where I am. Also, I think, pretty non-replicable, but may have some useful insights for all of you. I did know that I wanted to go to law school when I was very young, but I didn't know why. It was just a feeling I had. And then I went to the University of Michigan undergrad, and I took some women's studies classes, and I said, oh, that's why. And then after undergrad, I went to London for a while and worked in a pub and in a travel agency. And then I figured out, oh, it's not just women's law that I want to do, it's international women's law, because this is fun, I like traveling. But it's also very interesting. And so when I came back, I went to law school at George Mason University School of Law right across the river in Arlington. Not what you would think of as a place where somebody who was interested in international human rights law would go. I was talking earlier with some folks here about, where should I go to law school, and what do you think is the best public interest program? And I really think that your legal education and where you take it is really what you make of it. I think I'm proof that you can go to GNU, which is like conservative libertarian at best, and really come out and do whatever you want. And in fact, it sort of reaped its own rewards in a weird way, so they didn't really know what to do with me. They all liked me, but the Career Services was like, we have nothing to offer, like a liberal Democrat who wants to do human rights law. So they literally called American University School of Law and said, can you take pity on this woman and let her use your career services? I'm like, sure, come over. So yeah, so that didn't yield
field as many opportunities as I would have hoped either. So I took matters into my own hands and walked into Amnesty International's offices. This is back in like 1998. And was like, I love you guys. I love what you do. Can I intern for you? And like Alexandra, I'd actually had done after my first year of law school, had gone with the U.S. State Department to Malawi and spent the summer in the embassy in the Lilongwe there. And so because I not only could point out Africa on a map, but had actually been there, Amnesty was like, great, you can work in the Africa department. It's like, okay, that's fantastic. So yeah, I mean, we've come a long way, hopefully, I think, since then. So, you know, I made my own luck there. And then, you know, fast forward, 10 plus years, when I decided that I wanted to also, become an adjunct law professor there, it was quite easy. I called up the dean, who I knew from my time there. She, remembered me quite well because she keeps sending, like, whatever other lost souls have accidentally applied to Mason. She's like, I know a woman, her name's Christina, go talk to her. So anyway, so when I called her up, she was like, oh, fantastic, we would love to have you. Of course I remember you, would you like to teach? And I said, yeah, what I really want to teach is lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender human rights law for you guys. And they were like, sure. Really? So my friend who works at the Human Rights Campaign, still, which is where I used to work, we now teach sexuality in the law at George Mason. It's focused on primarily LGBT civil rights law, but obviously deals with women's issues. You have to teach cases like Roe v. Wade to talk about Lawrence v. Texas. And we bring in an international component now as well. And it's the only class that they have like that at the university. It's the first time they've offered something like that. So I think that's it ended up being sort of a useful connection. And anyway, so going back to life is what you make of it. After George Mason, I took a job at a small law firm in Old Town Alexandria doing general civil litigation. It wasn't my preferred career choice, and sometimes you take a job because you've got bills to pay, and that's the job that you can get. And I always like to tell young women of promise or people who come to me asking about career advice about that, because I feel like so many people these days of all ages are just so terrified of making that next wrong career move, and like, okay, I'm coming out of undergrad and what I really want is to be like, the deputy policy director of the international, and I'm like, sometimes you just go and do like mechanics liens because that's what they're like, which I find like oddly fascinating. My alternative career path is like nerdy regulatory lawyer, so I did that. I did it for about 2 years. It wasn't the job that I wanted, but I learned a ton. It was litigation. It was sort of that traditional lawyer role, which I think is always going to come in handy. I love the like union card that you can never, that can never be taken away from you. I think that's very true. But it wasn't where I wanted to go. So eventually I saw a job announcement for legal counsel to the Congress of the Republic of Palau. Never heard of the country before, but I looked it up. I used the Googles, and I found out that it's one of the world's premier diving destinations. I didn't actually scuba dive at the time, but that still sounded really good. So I applied, and it was actually 6 weeks between the time that I saw the job and the time I landed on island. So it was 2 weeks to get the job, 2 weeks to give notice, and 2 weeks to pack up my life and move. And I went on a 1-year contract, and I ended up staying for 2. For those of you who don't know, Palau is a small Micronesian nation over by Guam in the Philippines. And I did certainly learn to scuba dive. I went scuba diving about every Sunday, and I learned to spearfish. But beyond that, it really was an incredibly substantive legal position. I was one of 2 counsels for the House side of their Congress, and it is a clan-based society with an overlay of an American-style democracy. It's a fairly new democracy. So I drafted legislation. I drafted committee reports. I wrote speeches. We actually even ended up defending Congress in a separation of powers lawsuit that the president had filed over some issues in one of the yearly budgets, and we won. So it was an incredibly substantive legal job, and makes for an endless variety of anecdotes. I always get invited to speak on panels because of it. It's fantastic. So I highly recommend taking that chance. I literally had not heard of the country. I didn't know anyone, and signed the contract via fax. But it just ended up being the most amazing experience, and something that I highly recommend. So after 2 years there, in a country of 20,000 people, it was definitely time to move back to the United States and continue on my career path. I always like to say at that point I was the best legislative lawyer on the island, which isn't to say I was a good legislative lawyer, I was just the best one on the island. So it was time to move home. I came home back to DC and ended up working on the Hill, which is where I worked for about a year prior to law school. Again, my first job on the Hill I got by walking into the office and asking for a job. Apparently that's a strategy that works very well for me. I've ended up with about 3 jobs that way. So never underestimate just taking the bull by the horns and going in and asking for what you want. And so I ended up working after I returned from Palau, for Congressman Elsie Hastings of Florida, who's a fantastic member to work for. You could write anything and he would say it. So it's great working for a lieutenant that agrees with almost every point of view you've got as well. And we had sort of a deal. I was ledge counsel for him while I was looking for something in the civil and human rights community. And I ended up accepting a position with the Human Rights Campaign as senior counsel for them. So I was their lead counsel on the Matthew Shepard Act, the hate crimes legislation that passed a couple of years ago. Lead counsel on Don't Ask, Don't Tell, repeal, and a host of other issues, including international judicial nominations, etc. And that experience, I have to say, I'm a legislative lawyer. It's a little bit different than some of the other career paths you've been hearing about. So, and even coming off of Palau, where I'd done legislative work for 2 years, it was putting on a little bit of a different hat. So I was drafting legislation, regulatory comments, etc. But I was also expected to, draft speeches, draft op-eds, talking points, media work, public speaking, the whole range of issues, and really putting on that advocacy hat, which is very different than some of the work that you're doing as an attorney, where you're going to analyze the case law, come up with your best arguments, and hit that like IRAC or crack method of writing, and then someone's asking you to draft this op-ed. There's a ton of translatable skills, but it's still putting on a little bit of a different worldview to write. And you're using, like in law school, they're like, it's a term of art, you have to keep using it, and then you try to do that when you're drafting an op-ed, and the media director's like, you just have used that term like 7 times, and I can't. You've got to like mix it up a little. So it's a a very different skill set. But I have to say that. And now in my present position as the head of the women's program at Amnesty, being a lawyer is an incredibly useful set of skills to have. Everything from your ability to analyze, legislation, the situation that you're in politically, to the ability to organize your thoughts into a memo. I mean, many is the advocacy piece of writing I've seen that's just completely useless because there's no structure to it, and I think that's something that lawyers really, that's what you learn in law school, how to structure arguments, how to put, your best arguments forward, and really, set that up for folks. And, in my current position, sort of a bit of, mostly it's advocacy focused on the U.S. government, but there is legislative lawyering work when there's, legislation to be drafted, amendments to review, regulatory comments. So I really run the full range of both legal, policy, and advocacy issues. So in my current role, some of the issues that we're handling right now are basically, what we look to do is advocate to the US government to apply international human rights law and standards. You know, so we talked earlier a little bit about CEDAW. It's so exciting to hear that CEDAW is actually, you know, being used and its principles are being put into play in Tanzania. We can't say the same in the United States. It's been over 30 years, and I'm still working on ratification. I mean, you know, not 30 years ago, I wasn't, but there are some people in the coalition who are like, yes, I was here actually 30 years ago, and I continue to work on this. So, you know, really trying to convince the United States that the international human rights framework has something to offer, that it's something that we should be looking to, and that is something that we should be implementing here in the United States. Today, actually, in the Senate, they're marking up the Disabilities Treaty, so that's very exciting. We haven't ratified a human rights treaty in the United States for over a decade, and so we might actually see some progress on it in this Congress. And of course, the CEDAW coalition is hoping it may pave the way for CEDAW ratification, but you know, we'll have to see. But my job at Amnesty, in addition to looking to implement human rights law and standards, is also internally facing. So I look to integrate gender throughout the work of Amnesty International, and that has very real and exciting implications for the work we're doing externally. So when we're working on issues that aren't specifically focused on women, such as the new arms trade treaty that's being drafted, part of my job description is to make sure that when we're undertaking advocacy campaigns around things like the arms trade treaty, that we're taking gender into account and talking about the ways in which, in particular for the ATT, gun violence disproportionately affects women. So it's a very exciting mix of both legal, legislative, lawyering work, policy work, and the advocacy component as well. But I want to leave some time for questions, so I will leave it at that.
So thank you to all of our speakers. Hopefully, as promised, you heard a diversity of experiences. But I did hear some chorus, a choir of points that kept coming up during all of these speeches that I just wanted to quickly highlight. What I heard, what the common thread I saw through the speakers was, first, speak confidently and speak loudly. And if it doesn't come naturally to you, there's always the reporter's motto of make it or fake, or what is it, fake it until you make it. So that was a common thread, I think, with all of them. Also, don't pay attention to perceived barriers. All of the speakers took matters into their own hands, made their own paths, did not necessarily follow a straight path, a beaten path that had been laid out before them. I think one of the speakers used another cliche of taking the bull by the horns. Also, keep your eyes and ears open as well as your networks. Take advantage of any and every opportunity to share and hear from the people that you're meeting. And also, if you're going to go into a law firm, take advantage of pro bono. Use that as your opportunity to develop experience and skills that you couldn't necessarily get in your own practice. And as a way, if you choose to segue into other interests. With that, I'll open it up to questions. I'm sure there are many.
Clara, I'm sorry if I may say something first, because I meant to say this earlier and it feeds on the theme. Something that I have kept in mind throughout my career is that the phrase, all they can say is no. And I think that that certainly has come up here. You know, if you go and you ask and say, okay, I might be the first woman, but you can ask, and all they can say is no. Or I want to teach this class, all they can say is no. And obviously, you know, you can't just ask any question, but something to keep in mind. Okay, I'll be quiet. There were hands in the back.
I'm going to use the microphone as we're recording this.
Please introduce yourself. This is also networking breakfast. Hi, I'm Elisa. I was wondering, what are the most helpful skills you learned working on the Hill? How did that help you in your law career? And then how did having a law degree help you on the Hill? It seems like several of you work there.
Maybe I'll start and my colleagues continue. I remember very vividly the last week I was at the law firm before I went to the Hill. I was struggling to get a 50-page brief done within 50 pages on an extraordinarily minute legal issue. After I took a short vacation, started on the Hill, the ledge director said, now, just to be clear, Linda, when we write memos for the senator, and believe me, this was, Rhodes Scholar, Bill Bradley, extraordinarily bright senator, also very engaged, a page. Maybe a page and a half if it's a really complex issue. And I think first and foremost for me was taking the precision, the organization of legal writing and honing it to a discernible, readable document by public policy people. Now in the international business trade world that I live in, I think personally I've written about 50% of the letters. Our organization doesn't get the credit because we don't have a PR department. I rewrite every other letter because they're lacking precision, they're lacking the right advocacy, and that time on the Hill, but it was combined with that legal training and the law firm writing training that preceded it was critical. The other thing is understanding the dynamics of the situation you're in from all different sides. I worked on the Democratic side. My husband, had earlier worked on the Republican side. I worked for pro-trade Democrats. Most of the Democratic Party has gone the other way. It is important to understand every single perspective. We've worked in the last few years with a number of human rights and other civil society groups on preference legislation and things like that. It is important to know and be able to talk to people. Because you might think you understand what's going on, but sometimes there's a lot going on that you don't really understand. And so building those relationships and working collaboratively. And then I guess the final thing I would say, and it's something I've learned on the Hill and even more in my business world, which is to be effective and persuasive and make a difference in the things that you care about. It's not just you. It's not just your senator or your committee. It's building a network and a coalition. And the more you can expand the voices, the more you can do in what you want to do.
Yeah, I think I would agree with all of that. And I think the ability to analyze legal issues that you're going to get in law school, translates directly up onto the Hill when you're looking at legislation that's being proposed. Certainly there's a legislative counsel's office that drafts the legislation, can draft the legislation for you, but the better you understand the legal implications of the legislation you're trying to draft, the more accurate it's going to be. There's certainly a lot of bad legislation out there. So you want to know what you're putting in the bills. Virginia is a good example, but I'll leave it at that, and I would echo everything that Linda said as well.
There's a question up here.
Hi, my name is Valentina Luca. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's quite inspiring to see female international lawyers. I've been in the company of a lot of male international lawyers, especially in academia, and that's my question for Ms. Finch and Ms. Bay. You both mentioned that you teach classes, and in my experience, it tends to be an unfortunate fact that academia suffers from a glass ceiling of international women's rights or international human rights lawyers, and those who tend to perceive that international law should have a little more feminist critique to it. And I was wondering what's your take on that, and what you suggest are solutions for upcoming academics, aspiring ones, in that context. Thank you.
Do you want to go first, or shall I go first?
I guess I'll go. So I'm not on a tenure track at the university, so I'm not sure I can sort of fully speak to that experience as somebody who would be trying to be. For me, I've actually been really received with open arms at George Mason School of Law. They were really excited to have us teach the class. Continue to invite us back year and year, so I haven't experienced that as much, which is not to say that it's out there. I completely think that it is. I would look for resources and networks to find out more information and to help break through that. I think I'll plug International Law Girl blog as a great place to meet other international lawyers and figure out what's going on in the field of academia and what opportunities are available. And networking is key. I mean, there's an old boys network, so we definitely need a women's network.
I would say that what may have been done traditionally, the thing with academia, a lot of people who are in the positions, the top positions, not just in academia, but just in international law in general, are male. But it's also true that 40 years ago or 50 years ago when they went through law schools did not have that many women. And I think that if you look at International Law Girls blog or things like this, you see that in younger academic circles there are more and more women, which reflect the fact that more and more women are graduating law school. So that's not a direct answer and not a solution, but the idea is that I think that it is changing over time. I will say though something that someone had said to me, so I'm really just relaying advice, which I thought was an interesting comment though about how this still is. There is this gender divide or gender perception in academic circles. I was talking with a colleague about doing an article that had to do with treaty interpretation and looking at the Hague Convention on Child Custody and things like this. And here I am addressing these issues from very much a, self-executing. He said, no, standard treaty interpretation. And she said, if you're going to try and market that, you need to be aware that the committees who look at this will see that and just see family law. And won't understand that this is actually a matter of international legal interpretation and what have you. And I have to tell you, it had never occurred to me. And I feel very lucky and blessed to have grown up in a legal world where I have women role models. I've worked for female partners. I forgot. My innocence is I forgot that there are people who still may think that way. And so I say this not to be negative, but just it is true. There are still some people out there who do that, but I think it is changing.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, having taught a little bit, I would say, and it's also an opportunity for people who came late to talk again about the mentoring program that Willig and ASIL are going to roll out. I mean, mentoring and networking, particularly where you find sort of the glass ceilings or the old boys network, is really important sort of wherever you are, but certainly in academia. And I hope that our mentoring program can address some of those issues.
Hi, I'm Ann Goldstein, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to disagree with the premise of that last question. There is a glass ceiling. I'm sorry, there is an old boys network. I don't believe there is a glass ceiling. Not when Anne-Marie Slaughter is the dean of the Woodrow Wilson School of International Affairs at Princeton. Not when Martha Minow is the dean of Harvard Law School. She's got a lot of international expertise. So does Naomi Kahn, formerly of Willig, and formerly one of the deans at George Washington Law School. There are lots of fantastic, very highly placed women in international law in academia. That being said, I was at a panel last week where Anne-Marie Slaughter, on a panel on gender and data, was the only one of 5 women, that is 20%, and I was counting. She was getting 12.5% of the opportunities to speak, and when 2 members of the audience complained that she was one of only 5 women, one of the men on the panel said, well, that's okay because she counts as 5 of us because of her wonderful article on being a mommy. So I'm adding that last few words, okay? So, but I'm sorry, in a room full of young women, I know glass ceilings. The glass ceiling's been shattered. There's an old boy network, but there are plenty of opportunities. You've heard it from the women on this panel. Just go for it. Don't let yourself think that you're locked.
All they can say is no.
Any questions?
Hello, my name is Sherry Chung Tao. I come from Shanghai, China, and I'm a rising 7-year law school at George Washington University Law School. And I have 2 questions. The first is like what kind of skills and things you wish you had known when you were in law school and you think so definitely will help you a lot in your career path. And my second question is what kind of legal advice or you think will help a foreign citizen to help to develop career in the United States. And I really appreciate your thoughts and your sharing.
Well, I will say that one of my most rewarding experiences in law school and one of the most useful was doing a clinic. I did an asylum law clinic in law school, and I think especially in today's legal market, the ability to be able to say that you have worked on a real world case or written real world legislation or this kind of thing, to be able to have those practical skills and market them is very helpful in a career search.
I just want to put in a quick plug for mentoring. I wish I'd known how important it was to cultivate mentors for your career. I feel like that's something I came to much later than people who are probably a lot smarter than me and cultivated them a lot earlier, but it makes a world of difference. And there's all sorts of different advice about what type of mentors you need, but there's, you should have more than one, and they should be at various stages of their careers, and I think that's just really invaluable. And the other piece of advice I would give to you, which I think answers both of your questions, is developing strong writing skills. No matter what field you're in, what you're doing, the stronger the writer you are, the better they'll. It's just an incredibly useful skill that translates across all professions.
There you go.
Yes. Okay. Well, I was going to say that if you're a lawyer and you have the basic legal training, actually law is a continuous process. And you cannot learn everything at the university or in law school. But you will discover that once you get into the field, there will be so many things which you will learn which you never learned in school. And as long as you take advantage of every opportunity you get to learn more and more, you will practically learn everything which you need in your legal career. It doesn't matter where you are. Because, for example, those of us on the bench, we studied international law in school, but in practice, you will come, now that you have opened, you have a market economy, you will find that you will use a lot of international law principles, international trade matters, as you resolve disputes, or if you are dealing with shipping cases and related problems, and so forth, or international trade, generally international finances, big contracts involved in the World Bank, IFM, and so forth. So you can't really stop learning, and you can't learn everything in class. And for the university, those who are in the academy, actually we come to our universities as the center for change, because you have time and skills to do research, and you also train, but you also have time to assess what you are doing in the field, and therefore we interact a lot, particularly in terms of gender networking with the university professors in our countries, because they are kind of the think tank. We are the practitioners, so we get it's a to and fro. It goes to and fro. They assess, they do research, we practice, they give us feedback, and we give them feedback. So it's a constant program. But I think the women at the university have been very helpful to us in gender development and in effecting, particularly in terms of legislation, amendments, or even lobbying for women to be in the right places, because you have the right and you have the ability to speak. Now, some other careers can have restraints or implications, but the university is a free person, is a free place where a lot of thinking takes place, and therefore you should not confine yourself to say, I'm at the university, so this is my field. You must all the time relate to the society because you are members of the society. Just as we just get involved in the community, because we believe that we cannot stand and look at the community have problems. we have to get involved without compromising ourselves or our careers, what we are doing. So in that way, it becomes an interrelated network. And if you are thinking of building up gender power and a good gender base, I can't see myself doing it without the university. Thank you.
And actually, if I can add one more thing, I think that something else we've seen across the speakers and prior speakers is you will always excel and do best in the things you are passionate about. And, you know, in addition to the black letter law courses that are foundation for being a lawyer, take the classes that you don't know where they'll lead you, you don't know how it's helpful, it seems like an irrelevant kind of side issue, but you're really interested in it because who knows where that might lead you. Your focus on the Islamic religion could, you know, later lead you towards paths that you didn't imagine. So take that passion course that you don't think will necessarily be helpful because it actually might be.
There's a hand over there.
One more question? Actually, she had raised her hand first. Sorry. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ingrid Rosario. I go to Vermont Law School. Actually, we all
The Fighting Swans.
We're here in force. Yeah. So I wanted to thank you, ladies, for coming out to speak to us, making the time in your schedule to speak to us. But I also wanted to ask a question about so we're here to promote women in international law, but I believe that sometimes we lose sight of the men who are already in the industry, who are there to help us, who are looking to help bring us up. And so I was wondering if you, a few of you, one of you, all of you, could touch on maybe some of the things that we can look for as new lawyers, and sometimes lawyers looking to change laterally from the male portion of the workforce, in terms of how do we know where to go in terms of help? Are they looking to help us, or are they looking to keep us down? I mean, not keep us down, just keep us out. I guess some of your mentors, or
I mean, half my mentors are men. I mean, I use the term gender neutrally for a reason. So, I mean, it does come back to, like, just ask them. And I think you can get a pretty good sense of, you know, whether people want to be helpful. And, like, one of my best, like, some of my best allies within Amnesty for trying to mainstream gender are some of the men, right? So when I go to, you know, somebody in the organization who's a man, and I say, you know, I see the work that you're doing, and I really think that you need to add, you know, a gender component to it, and really lift up sort of, you know, some of these issues. And then they say, oh my God, that's fantastic, and can you help me put some information together? Okay, that's fine, that's great. And if you get that resistance, then, you know, you have to, you know, learn paths around it and address it. But I mean, I think that most men want to be, we wouldn't discount men just because they're men. I mean, just, you know.
But I would say, and I would add, I would actually say that the majority of my mentors have been male, and part of that comes from the specialties that I pursued early on and things like this. But if you're looking to try and douse who may be approachable, may I advise finding men with daughters. I'm actually quite serious about this, because I have seen people who, not that they had anything against women in any way, but I think it was not until they had daughters who for instance, got to, you know, be teenagers, that they realized that there are still issues out there, and that there are discussions to be had, or that there could be a problem or an extra bit of programming you need to add, or something like this. So if you're looking from a blank slate as to whom to approach, that would be a suggestion I'd give.
And I would agree with all that. I would just add one additional piece. I mean, most of the mentors I've had have been men But that doesn't mean, and this goes back to the point about the old boy network, you know, in the world of international trade and investment law in which I live, it's a field where there are a lot of women lawyers, although when I was at a law firm, I was the senior most woman in my group. I was a fifth-year associate. And you could feel it at that point, you know, when a more senior woman had left, and you know, there were issues there. You see it less on the Hill. There's a lot of diversity, you know, broadly, gender, other. In the business world where I am, I'm, you know, probably one of the most prominent women in that little niche. And one of the things that I've found as I see some of my guy friends who, you know, I'm at a different stage of my life. I've got two kids, school-age kids. I try to get home for dinner. I have a husband who works. We both work, and we're in this situation where we are working parents outside of the house. He's in a world where his boss says to him, well, why is your wife in Australia? Why didn't you tell her not to go? It's like, excuse me? Even my boys question that. But it's to create your own network. The work that all is being done here is fabulous. But when I came back from my second pregnancy, I started a trade mom lunch group of women like me, different ages. We'd get, you know, with kids with different ages, and we'd get together and we would talk about everything from work to diapers to what party you're going to have for your child. And you have to form, I think, even within those subgroups of the international law field that you're in, those types of networks. And that's sort of gone a wayside. It got too big. Everyone wanted to join. You couldn't really manage it. But, you know, having those things as sort of backstops, right? Because I know my guy friends do that. And it's not that they always want to exclude me, but, you know, they get to go out drinking when I got to go home and make dinner.
Yeah, maybe I will only add that my experience as a judge is that if you want equality and equal rights for every person, you have to incorporate the man and the woman. You can't work alone. And as we train judges in human rights and particularly in fundamental human rights, where they can apply human rights and also look at issues which affect vulnerable groups, we don't train them separately. We train all judges, men and women. And there are some very sensitive issues which we thought we were going to get resistance. For example, our current project, the Sextortion Project. I don't know whether you heard about that, but the International Association of Women Judges has been had a program for 3 years, stopping, naming, shaming the exploitation, abuse of office, sexual exploitation by abuse of office. That touches on men, and some women too, but I think mostly men. It's what we term sextortion. At that project, we had to train judges and law enforcers to sensitize them so that they would stop exploiting women sexually at their places of work. And at first we thought, wow, we are going to start a big war. But we were surprised because we have first we had the training for trainers, a TOT. And in this, we have 20 trained trainers, among them 7 are men, male judges. The senior ones with people with integrity, fathers. Fathers meaning they have their wives, they have their daughters. So we were surprised when we started this project, which we thought was going to be quite sensitive. They backed us fully. And whenever we got the sextortion seminars, we always take a male trainer along, so that they don't get the impression that it's the women telling us things. Particularly where we go to the army, for example, the women police will say, come and train our officers because, you know, the command goes up. So if an officer says, come and sleep at my house, you have to go and sleep at his house. And they can tell their bosses that this is wrong. So women just come and train. Come and train our officers. So when we go to such sensitive areas, we take the male trainers along with us. So they do part of the program and we do part of the program. And the reception has been excellent. And when we went to Parliament, that time we had one for policymakers, for ministers. That's also another area which is very sensitive. Because power, you know, power corrupts. It has its own problems. and we had about 50 of them. And we had our male trainers and ourselves. So went all armed, hoping of course that they wouldn't think we are coming to tell them what to do and what to do. Who knows what is right and what is wrong anyway. You know the way people speak when they look at these issues. But when we went with our male trainers, we started the program well, and the reception was again, they said, you are late. You should have started this a long time ago. So what I'm saying is, wherever you're staying, whatever you're doing, don't ignore the male factor. Because we are living in the same society.
Absolutely.
We want to, Claire and I want to thank you for coming to this breakfast, and please take the opportunity to say hello to your neighbor, come meet the panelists, and I just want to mention again, encourage you to join ASIL, to join Willig, and to look in the fall for our mentoring program, and to let Claire and I know if you have ideas about that. Thank you again.
Also, I will put in a shameless plug for the new professionals interest group that I'm a co-chair of as well. I see a lot of new professionals here, so ASIL has a lot of opportunities.
All right, perfect.